Hey, welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding. I'm Mark Rudin, and today I'm building the Catalina Wherry. We are going to scarf plywood with a router. I finally broke down and built a router jig. My reluctance to doing it is it's like one more thing cluttering up the workshop. This workshop is cluttered up enough. However, I thought, okay, let's give it a try. I hate using a power plane for doing this stuff. I find it particularly irritating. So I thought, at very least, maybe this is going to replace the power plane. So I made this jig and I did some testing, and it took a while to get it to where I could confidently use it without tearing up this leading edge, the feather edge. So what I found was I can't take it to a feather edge. I've got to stop short of that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to set these up, and I'm going to use this jig to do the bulk of the rough work. And I've got this nice little gun here that's just going to tack it all down. These are polymer nails, so they're just going to break right off when I want them to. They're pretty short. Now, to increase our productivity using this jig, I'm going to be using polymer nails. These are made by a company called Raptor. This is not sponsored by them. These are 18 gauge polymer nails. They come in various lengths, obviously, and they also come in a heavier 14 gauge format, and you can also get them in staples. Now, the beauty of using polymer fasteners like this is that they are great for just sort of tacking things in place. Now, they're not meant to be used as a fastener all on their own. They're intended to be used in conjunction with glue. You should be able to just sand off the surface, and they basically fill their own nail hole. Now, that doesn't always work in practice, because I do find that the nail gun tends to drive it a little deeper than I would like it. And when I was introduced to these nails, I was told that they could only be used in conjunction with this nailer made by a company called Omer, also not sponsored. Now, this nailer does not have any depth control, which I find a little bit frustrating because, as I said, these do tend to drive a bit deep. I probably need to adjust the overall air pressure on my system to control that. Now, I've been asked many times whether or not you can use these nails in any brad nailer. Well, stick around to the end of the video and we will find out. So I'm just going to stack all of these up, holding back my line just a hair. And then we'll run the router over it and just knock down the tops. I tried to make this jig big enough that it could take care of like 6 of these 1/4 inch sheets, or 2 3/4 inch sheets. I hope I did. Now, I hadn't decided if I'm going to do a big glue up of all of these at once, but what I did decide was, no matter what, every one of these is going to get a scarf on one end, even if I rip it down into smaller pieces to shape on the boat. So, worst case scenario was I end up with a little bit of a skewed scarf on one end of a plank, and I can just correct it. Even if I got to correct the scarf, at least the bulk of it's already taken away, so it'll be fine. It'll still work for me. Don't think it's gonna make it for the last one. Let's see, so this guy can go here. Oh, darn it. Oh, yeah. Oh, just. Should have made it just a hair bigger, damn. Isn't that always the way? And one thing that's important when you're scarfing long pieces of plywood like this is you got to jack up the back end. You got to make sure it's going whoop uphill, or else the feather edges will want to pop up on you. So I can take this down till it's just about starting to cut into the final veneer, and then I need to finish them off by hand is what I discovered. Good. Should put some clamps on here, make sure it's not going anywhere. Why I love these big deep throat clamps. They allow me to reach way, way back there. Throw another couple of guys here. Even better, let's see if I can grab them there. If I do that, and I got a little stop to make sure I'm not tearing that thing off by accident. So this guy just slides up. You see that's popping up right there. And here's the beauty of the polymer nails. I can, if it's gonna make me a little hole, but at least I can tack down this stuff. I don't mind the little hole. Little holes we can fix. So those won't hurt the router bit one little ounce. See, that's popping up there too. Okay, let's fire it up. Here's our jig, and it's really nothing but a board with a couple of wedges attached to it. Now these wedges have the exact same ratio as the scarf we want to create, and we're going to use a 12:1 scarf. That means for every 12 inches of run, we have 1 inch of rise. With our 1/4 inch plywood, the thickness of the plywood is the rise, and that's going to give us roughly a 3-inch run, 12:1. So our jig here has this sacrificial board, and that's just so that when our rudder runs off the end of our plywood, we've got something that is going to take the brunt of that abuse and not allow the router to hit the base itself. Now I've added a couple of fastening holes in here, and that allows the jig to fasten down to my workbench, which has got some threaded inserts into the end of the bench here. That way I don't have to use clamps to hold it down. We've got a couple little stop blocks on the end, and that's to prevent the sled from falling off the end of the jig. And then of course we have the sled itself, and it's nothing more than a U-channel with a slot in the bottom that the router bit moves in. Now I've made this a little bit wider than my router, and that's just to make it easy to move back and forth without worrying about it getting jammed up at all. It doesn't need to be super accurate. We've got a couple stop blocks on the ends that stop the router from biting into our wedges at either end of the jig. And then we're using a big cutter here. It's going to take a lot of material off in one swath, so that's exactly what we want. Now this is a bit aggressive, and so the downside is when you get down to the feather edge of the plywood, it kind of chews it up a little bit. If I wanted to use something a little gentler, something like a bullnose cutter would be the thing to use. But of course, that's going to take a lot more passes in order to waste away the amount of wood that we're going to take away. So this is my final cut right here. So I can plunge down to that, which means I can do a lighter pass. We'll do that. I'm going to come back a full 1/8 of an inch for the first pass. I found doing it in a couple of passes seems to be a better course of action than trying to pound through it all in one shot. Which is not surprising. It's usually the case with most things. All right, now I'm going to suit up and mask up and start cutting. It's going to get loud. Now you notice how the scarf face on the top layer looks very uneven relative to the bottom layer. And that's because the flexibility of the plywood is such that as you get further up the stack, it gets more and more wobbly because it just isn't able to stay flat enough. You need to clamp it down really hard to make that happen. And for that reason, I don't love doing stacked plywood scarfing methods. But it is a fast way to try and get rid of as much material as possible across a whole bunch of plywood. However, obviously we're going to have to put a little more handwork into the top layers than we do in the bottom layers. So I decided to smarten up and make myself a really good clamping caul for scarfing. So this is just for doing a half sheet scarf. Piece of MDF, nice and flat, and I'm going to glue onto it this piece of arborite. A little cleanup to do. So I'm just going to buzz this off on the table saw, square it all up, and then we'll just give this a coat of paste wax the edges. The arborite is just because it's super smooth. Epoxy doesn't stick to it very well, which is why I've got it on this table here. It's going to make a good long-lasting thing, and it'll stick around the shop for years now. So we've got our clamping pad here, which is a piece of 3/4 inch MDF and a layer of arborite on top, and I've just kind of chamfered off the edges of these slightly so that you don't get any hard edges if you clamp this down too hard to something. This is really just to give a nice smooth surface that the glue squeeze out can bear against, and it also helps spread the load of our clamping. Now, the thicker your backing pad like this, the better. So while this is 3/4 of an inch thick one would be even better. And then we've got our curved clamping cauls, and these have got about 3/8 of an inch of camber in them. It could be a little bit heavier, maybe 1/2 inch wouldn't be bad. And the idea is that if you clamp both ends of this down, the center being curved, being proud, is going to apply pressure where your clamps aren't sitting. I've got a layer of packing tape on here so that no glue squeeze out is going to stick to these. Super useful, and while this seems like a big expense to use up a whole bunch of ash like this, ash is a relatively economic wood, and in this case I had a bunch of planks that were left over from a job that just they weren't suitable for the job itself, but they have made perfectly good clamping cauls. You could use any kind of wood for this, but hardwoods are better than softwoods for this kind of application. So this is the boat where I've decided to try and do things smarter, if possible.
Gluing up a plywood scarf all starts out with a generous wetting out of all that end grain with unthickened epoxy.
So this bench is specifically made for being able to glue up like half sheets of plywood like this, but I only just clued into the idea of putting a block on here so I can use a clamping caul on there.
For years I screwed around with pushing clamps up against the ceiling to clamp these things down. It worked okay, but it was always kind of fussy and a big time killer. Once we've finished wetting out both of our scarf faces with unthickened epoxy, we're going to thicken up the rest of the epoxy to about a heavy jam consistency, and we're going to butter up the face of those joints. The idea is that this coat will fill all the grain of the wood, and if there's a void in between our two scarf faces, it will fill that too. So this is a very important step to getting a good structural joint.
Let's go that way. So there's a couple finishing nails there at the end of the bench. Yep. So they just butt up against those. Slide them right in.
I'll use a couple of small finishing nails driven directly into the surface of the bench in order to register my scarf at just the right location. I'm using a poly-coated butcher's paper to cover my glue joint. It works just like wax paper, but it's just a little bit more durable. The arborite covered clamping block we made up is going to go over that joint. That's going to spread the load and help make sure that we get a nice even gluing surface. Then we're going to use a curved clamping caul and a wedge underneath that block on the back of the bench. That's going to hold down the pressure at the very back where we can't reach it with a clamp easily. And then we clamp down the other end of that curved caul near the edge of the table. And the curve in the caul is going to spread that load across the whole clamping block. And that's going to give us a really nice even clamping pressure across the width of this board.
Not worry about crushing the joint, like pushing it back at all?
That's why the nails are on the ends.
Okay.
It butts up against the lamp down there, so
it won't.
Yep.
Nice.
It's a fairly flat scarf too. It's a 12-to-1 scarf, so
It's got.
The
It's,
likely-
it's not
the-
going to slide too much.
well, it can, it certainly
Yeah.
can, but it's less likely to because of
Yeah.
that scarf length. But I'll usually, it's never a stupid idea just to throw a little something on here to make sure it
slide
doesn't
back.
start creeping on me. So I'll throw a couple clamps on. I should have done that before. Actually, I usually do. There we go. We scarfed this plywood, which was the sort of the main course of the day. I ripped it, and then I decided to make that scarfing jig. I definitely feel like it was faster than playing around with a power plane, for sure. Because power planes are they're just horrible. I mean, they're great for some things, but I really hate using them for scarfing plywood, to be honest. But they're sort of the only tool you can do that with unless you've got a jig for your router or you're just doing it all by hand. I suppose you could do it by belt sander, but that would be an ugly job too. So wouldn't want to do that. Wouldn't want to do it with an angle grinder. So anyway, the jig is not very difficult to put together. Half of it was already built, really. The sled that the router sits on is something that I already had on hand. I built it to flatten my layup table 15, almost 20 years ago. I can't believe I've been in this shop that long. Man, crazy. Anyhow, I scarfed up one sheet, not the rest. That is, I glued up one sheet, not the rest. I smartened up and built a little, like the simplest thing that I don't know why I didn't do it a long time ago, which is just a little block on the backsplash of my bench here with a wedge so that if I use one of my big curved clamping cauls with a 3/4 inch backing block over the scarf, all I got to do is use one clamp. I got two clamps on there, but I could just get away with one clamp to clamp that scarf. This bench is built for actually gluing up sheets of plywood exactly like this. And I left, gaps underneath it so I could clamp and stuff like that, but I never even thought about setting up a little block on the back and use a wedge to clamp down one end of a caul. Pretty dumb. Anyway, so I'm trying to smarten up, which is why I made a nice clamping caul with some melamine on it or arborite for future use, waxed smooth. This gun that Joe sent me, gold. This is like, it took me 5 minutes to realize I should have bought this. The first time a Raptor guy comes not the Toronto Raptors, but the guys that make the gun. A Raptor guy came rolling into my shop like 25 years ago saying, "Hey, look at this gun with plastic nails." And I was like, "Oh, okay, interesting. How much is the gun?" $300. And I was like, nail guns at that time were about $100. So I was just like, I don't think so. And I got to mail order the damn things in from you. I don't like the idea of that. Anyway, that was pretty stupid of me because this thing was fantastic for doing these scarves. Being able to sort of just tack these things down to the jig, bunk, 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 scarf it all off, pop, 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 rip it all off. Oh, man. Okay, Joe, thank you so much. All right, now I've been asked over and over again whether or not you can run these polymer nails through a regular brad nailer. So the Omer gun is great. I got nothing bad to say about it except for the lack of depth control. But let's see what happens if we pop it into a regular nailer. So this is an older model Porter cable. It's the only model I've got to try this on. Okay, they went in. Eh? That seems to work. See if it jams. Ten shots, no jams. 20 shots, no jams. Huh. Well, let's see if we can use the depth control here. So let's go all the way. See what happens. Ah. That's what it's supposed to look like. Just barely proud. One of those is still a bit deep. So the odd ones are not burying themselves properly for some reason. Density in the wood, maybe. Anyhow, well, obviously not impossible. Not impossible. Well, what can I say? That worked. I would say if you're curious about using polymer nails, go ahead and get yourself a box. They're probably going to run you about, I don't know, 10 or 20 bucks for a box of these things. And go ahead and see if they work in the gun that you have. Obviously, there's a few here that are a bit misfired, so I'm not sure if that's a problem. Depends on what you're using it for. If you get a lot of use out of it, then consider getting yourself the Omer gun, I would say, because this one does say use genuine Raptor fasteners, so guaranteed there's some like knockoff polymer brad nails out there. I'm not sure how much of a difference that makes. Maybe there's some knockoff polymer brad nail guns too that could save you a few bucks. Hard to say. I mean, I trust that that's a good quality gun that's going to last you a good long time. That was interesting. So, lesson learned. Had these nails been available to me locally, I would have tried this a long time ago. All right. Why did I not glue up all that planking stock? There's a very good reason for that, and that is because I've got a strapped mold, I don't need to spile. The planks are going to be, the shape of the planks are going to be defined by those straps or the battens that are going to be on the mold. And that means I can basically trace my planks, which is something I can't normally do. Okay, so in order to do that well, I need the planking stock to lay on those battens really nicely. And if I got big full sheets of plywood, it is very hard to wrap those around a mold in order to trace around them. I've done it before, I did it with canoes, but it doesn't work really well. And you got to get the attitude just right, because if it isn't laying perfectly on those battens like the whole way along, when you go and cut, it's not going to lay down quite right, and you can end up sort of having this big old fight. So I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I think I'm just going to scarf in place on the mold as I shape the planks, which means I decided to just stop right here with where I was at. I scarfed one end because I know I'll be putting scarves on one end of every plank regardless. Some of them I'll have to break up the spacing so that we stagger our scarves, which is something, I'll bet you anything, you really don't need to do it with glued lapstrake plywood. It's a holdover from traditional building, which I don't think you really need to do, because the glued joints are super strong, right? But maybe we'll do it anyway, I don't know. But the point being is I will wait till the mold is set up, and then I can figure out exactly how wide I need to rip my blanks in order to trace out my finished planks. Because I don't want to go and rip it all over wide. I don't want to rip it all over narrow and end up hooped. So we'll just put it to the side. When the mold's set up, it'll be easy. I can just rip them as I need them on the table saw. Now they're smaller, they're manageable, and that's part of the goal for me, is just break this stuff down so that I can handle it in the shop without peeling everything off the tops of the benches, which I do with alarming regularity. Now, these videos are supported by my followers on Patreon. So if you'd like to join me over there, you can find links in the corner or down in the description. You can also support me by just subscribing, leaving comments, maybe leave some comments on the other boat building channels. Send a few folks over my way. I'd really appreciate that too. All right, join me again next time when we start putting some planks on this boat. Catch you later, folks. That's a wrap.